Chris Lee and Blake Lovell from Southeastern 14 here to talk about Wednesday night SEC basketball action. Some pretty good games. Let's start with the most significant one in my mind. LSU hobbled. Darius Days doesn't play. That ankle got worse. Xavier Pinson still in street clothes. Tari Eason misses a good bit of the second half with cramps. I'm watching that going, I don't know how LSU does this, but the crowd was wild and into it. Damian Fishback later suggested that's what carried LSU to victory. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But Will Wade got a win for LSU last night when it all started to go wrong at once. And that's a big one, Blake.
It's amazing when you're a good defensive team how much easier things are. Even when you lose guys, I think it's just a part of their team now that they can make enough stops, they can make enough plays, and it doesn't all have to be perfect. And that's the goal I think you have is when you're a team like this. We keep saying, I mean, no one's gonna compare LSU's offense to some of these juggernauts we've seen in the past, but at the same time, no one's going to compare their defense either to the LSU defenses we've seen in the past. And I think you just look at it here. I mean, again, you just look at how the game plays out, right? They give up 64 points. I mean, go up and down the line here of their games, even in games they've
Yeah.
lost, like to Arkansas, they gave up 65. To Alabama, they gave up 70. Tennessee, they gave up 64. They lost those three games, but they're right there with a chance in two of those because they just get stops and they make you play a style that you don't necessarily on offense want to play.
Yeah.
And I mean, again, keep going back, right? It's like 58 to Florida, 67 to Tennessee, 60 to Kentucky. Even the loss at Auburn, they only give up 70. I mean, I'm looking at this now, and I'm sure I realize this off the top of my head, but they've only given up 70 points. They've only given up 70 points twice this year.
Wow.
I
And
mean,
that's
think
with
about
having
how
guys out at times.
Right. Think about how ridiculous that is.
Yeah.
They've played 20 games and they've given up 70 points twice. And I mean, it's just that's remarkable. And I think that's going to give you a chance to win. And, I know people have been talking about this and, the question seemingly has been asked a lot over the past week. It's like, well, Auburn's one, Kentucky's two. Who's three? I keep saying it's
Mm-hmm.
LSU.
Yes.
I understand that people want to look at this team and see this 3-game losing streak heading into last night and say, well, they're 3-4, but you just got to look at the schedule. And as we said, there was no one that had a tougher, 8-game, 7-game stretch, I guess you could say, than LSU to start SEC play. And here they are now at 500. I think that's a good place to be. And if they have everyone on the floor, they are the third best team. And quite frankly, they may, they can say we got a claim to be the second best team, or maybe they make a run. I don't think they're going to be obviously challenging Auburn at this point because they have 4 SEC losses, but they're really good. And I still think 20 games in, we don't give this team enough credit because even with the injuries, even with things going against them, they just find ways with the defensive side. And last night they just found a way to win that game. So
No, I'm with you. If we did power rankings 1 to 14, LSU in the 3 spot is the easiest call on the board. I mean, we would go Auburn 1, Kentucky 2. You could argue that Washington didn't play that game, whatever, and make a case for it. I don't think that I would put anybody below LSU ahead of them. I don't think I'd put LSU ahead of either of those two teams. But for LSU, what stands out for me is they contest everything, first of all. Rebounds, shots, everything. And it just is a relentless energy. And when you're really athletic, that helps. But number 2, they're having guys step up. Brendan Murray's played good games at time. Eric Gaines has had to run the point. Sometimes he's turnover prone. Last night he was fine. And then Sharif O'Neal, who I forgot was even on the team, steps up and hits some big buckets for them. So it's guys finding roles and making it happen, Blake.
yeah, they've got some sneaky depth. I mean, think about it. They're playing without what 2 of their 3 top players in Days and Pinson in this one, but
Yep.
yet you still have what was it? I think it was 8 guys that played close to 20 minutes or more,
Yeah.
and you beat a good A&M team, and I think that's something else. A&M's not bad, and I think for A&M, it's they're I think again they're another one that doesn't get credit, but they're also one that I think is kind of reaching a pretty tricky point here to where they have to start winning some games. And They have to start beating some of these good teams because they don't have the
Yeah.
NCAA tournament resume to support it. Maybe they look like an NCAA tournament team, but they got to start beating some of these teams, or else they're not going to have the resume to do that. And so they'll get their opportunities, especially over the next month or so. They've still got games against Tennessee, LSU, Auburn, but really, that's about it.
Hmm.
You got Alabama and Mississippi State late, but those will help obviously one way or the other. But yeah, they don't have a ton of opportunities on this schedule, and obviously they've had three big ones here recently with Kentucky, Arkansas, and LSU. That's what we said. That win against Arkansas. Um, it's a good one to have now because Arkansas is headed in the right direction, but they need to pick up, probably three or so more of those somewhere. I think to really have a solid resume to feel pretty good about where they're going to be heading into March.
I'm going to call my shot now, and I'm looking up net rankings on the phone. They were 60 coming in, and after last night, they're 53, so they actually went up with the road loss. But I watched them, and I'm calling my shot now because they've got to do it, and it's a tricky needle to thread in that sense. But I think that's an NCAA tournament team as I watch them. Blake, they're athletic, they're deep. Andre Gordon's playing really well. Tyrese Radford gives him things at times. We've talked about Henry Coleman the third. Wade Taylor stepped up. They're deep and they're really athletic. And frankly, I'm thinking last night as I'm watching that game, I'm like, I'm circling that rematch between these two teams, which I think is on February the 8th in College Station, because that was just a really entertaining game to watch last night. The way those two teams get up and down the floor and defend and just go at each other, it's fun to watch.
Yeah, no, they look like a team. I just think they need to start figuring out, they got to win some of these games to support
Yeah.
that. But if you think about it, we talked about this before. Four of their five losses this year by what, 6 points or less. So, they're right there. They have been in every game they played in, even the game against Wisconsin. They lost by 11 in November, but you're right there with the chance in the second half, and yeah, they're kind of on that same range of somewhat like a Mississippi State, right? And we keep saying just doesn't really get blown out, and they're usually right there with a chance. And now they move past this pretty tough three-game stretch. Now you get South Carolina, Missouri. This is where for A&M it becomes important that you can't drop the games to the bad teams, and
Yeah.
they don't have. I just think they don't have the resume yet to support being able to
No.
do that. So they've got to win those kind of games. They can't afford that. And then beyond that, like I said, they've got to pick off an LSU or a Tennessee or teams like that to really start adding some value there. So.
Tennessee, Florida, that was a tale of two halves. I think Tennessee turned it over 12 times in the first half, was down by 8, got on a roll in the second half. Santiago Vescovi, who is their best player, carried them again. He carried them in the first half when they struggled. I think he had 14 in the first half, 23 for the game. For Tennessee, that was a win they needed. For Florida, this just is not a very good team without Colin Castleton. I don't know when they get him back. I just don't think they have an answer with him gone. They did shoot well. I guess not well from three. They were 10 of 30. They hit a lot of them, 10 of 33, but not a really good percentage. But I just don't see a team that's got enough without him to make the NCAA tournament. Net this morning, 45. Net's not going to matter if they don't get him back soon enough because they won't make it. And I think folks are getting fairly or unfairly a little impatient with Mike White. Now, I would point out he's down his best two players. If you want to go back a year and considering they lost the preseason SEC player of the year last year who's still on their bench but not playing. But I've thrown a lot at you. What do you take out of this one?
Well, to start with the first part, I mean, Florida's in a situation where without Colin Castleton, it's not. I mean, it's not rocket science. They're not as good, and the issue now becomes talk about the net and all that, which I continue to advocate against. But just like their
You've
net's
been
only
outvoted by the NCAA, sir.
well, unfortunately, their net's only going to go down from here over the next probably 2 weeks because they play Oklahoma State, who's 10-9. They play Missouri, Ole Miss, and Georgia. So even if they win all four of those games, they're not having a drastic movement, I don't think, in the net because, as we said, net sometimes awards losses to good teams, and wins against bad teams only take you further down. So I think that's also the issue, right? Is they've now put themselves in a spot where they're 3-5 in the SEC. and they have to win these next 3 games in the league. They have to beat Missouri, Ole Miss, and Georgia because you can't afford those losses at this
Yeah.
point. But yet, if you don't have Colin Castleton, those games get a lot more tricky, especially the one at Missouri, which we've talked about. Missouri is one of the most improved teams in the league. So, yeah. So I think that's where the issue comes in for Florida. Talk about the frustration with Mike White. I think that happened years ago. I think
Yeah.
that's just been a common thread, and it's based on consistency. This has been, I'd argue, the most inconsistent team in the league over the past 4 or 5 years. At times, they look like the number one team in the country. At other times, they look like they're, a bottom four team in the league. And that just gets frustrating in a certain amount of time. Not to go into this whole discussion now, because it's one that's been had before. The expectations were not realistic immediately because I think when you hire anyone at Florida, your expectation is always to compare him to Billy Donovan, and back-to-back national championships, and doing that in this landscape's not easy to do, or impossible, I would say, in many regards. But although I guess Baylor has a chance to do it this year, but I mean, I think that, but the expectation goes beyond that, right? You're not even on that, you're not even close to that level, and I think that that's where the frustration set in with them. I mean, look, our preseason picks, I said I thought Florida was probably the sixth or seventh best team in the league. I didn't think they were a top three, top five team in the league. I just, on paper, it didn't look that way. And now, I think that's probably where they wind up, is kind of in that middle of the range somewhere. And maybe, their last four in, last four out, that kind of scenario. I just don't see much more of a ceiling for this particular team. And that becomes, then it's like, all right, well, how do we judge that based on where we go next? And again, I think that's a discussion that's been had for a long time. And whether anything happens, we'll obviously talk more about that once we get to the end of the season. So
Arkansas wins again. That's 5 in a row after 3 losses to start the season in SEC play. Ole Miss still without Jarkel Joyner. That's going to be a while longer, I think. Ole Miss has kind of been hit and miss, no pun intended. Just not a really good offensive team. Arkansas taking advantage of the opportunity in front of it. Again, Eric Musselman has shortened his bench. Basically, they play 6 guys last night. Chris Lykes plays 1 minute, which is not something I would have seen coming. Connor Vanover doesn't play at all. Looks like they've found something, and the schedule has something to do with it, but they've gotten themselves, I would say right now, on the good half of the bubble.
look, we jumped on the schedule train, pointed it out in mid-December, said, here's the deal. You know, if they, and I don't even think we even considered it because we just assumed that they were going to figure it out. But if they put themselves in a hole, they'd be able to get out of it because their schedule was good enough to help them in that scenario. And the thing is, now you've got that LSU win, and I think that was the most important win of the group because, you make up some ground there losing to Vanderbilt, right? Like your LSU win counters the Vanderbilt loss, and now you're cruising, and they're playing so much better. And like you said, maybe A&M gets there too. That win looks a lot better if A&M can make a push here. And
Yeah.
but now things get interesting, and now I think is where, obviously, I know this is used a lot, but like now is where your season starts if you're Arkansas, because it's like you've done enough now. You've made up this ground. You've gotten back to 5-3, but now you've got to take advantage of some of these opportunities, I think. And if they do, then we're having a much different discussion about Arkansas a month from now, because they have no shortage of opportunities the rest of the way. Obviously they play West Virginia this weekend. That's a team that's reeling. So that's another scenario where it's like, all right, there's a big opportunity for them because West Virginia's lost 4 in a row. Beyond that, then you start playing Auburn, you play Bama, Tennessee, Florida, Kentucky, LSU, Tennessee. Like they got all these top half teams waiting on them. And that's how you put yourself in that position to be able to stay right there, in that top part of the SEC. And so I think Arkansas ultimately gets to the NCAA tournament. Again, even when they were 0-3, like we said, all it takes is one game and to turn everything around. What do? They beat Missouri by 44 at home, and that was it. That was your launching pad. And so, yeah, they're playing a lot better. I think the shortening of the rotation is a good idea, because, as we said, at some point you realize what does not work, and you have to make some changes. You have to experiment. And I've always said, too, even going back to, when he took the job, some of Muss's best teams at Nevada were teams that played 6 people, and it was the right 6 people, and that made it work. And so that's what he's doing now, and I think that they are in a really good spot. And like I said, I think they're in a really good spot to beat West Virginia on Saturday, and then have even more momentum going into that really tough part of the back half of the SEC schedule.
Well, and this is not a first time he's done that. Like last year, you would watch guys see their playing time ping pong around. And I think that was dependent on matchups, right? Sometimes they might need to go big or go small. This year, he doesn't have quite the depth. He's got nice depth, but it's not what he had a year ago. And again, they're missing the superstar at the top, although J.D. Note has kind of become the lead dog they need in terms of a volume score. But it's not the first time he's done it. Now, I would say this is the first time that you've seen guys really, well, you can't really say that either because you saw Vanover disappear at times last year from the playing time. But the likes thing is just one that I wouldn't have seen coming into the year. I think he averaged 15 points a game at Miami a year ago, and I thought one of the better transfers in this league, but it's not working out. But all right, you mentioned Vanderbilt. Let's get to Vandy. The Commodores had a decent lead in that game. The wheels completely came off in Columbia last night. It kind of went down the way you and I thought it would. Thought Carolina would attack them inside. And the Gamecocks put on a dunk show the last 10 minutes of that one. I don't know how much you got to watch, but there were some highlight reel ones. Eric Stevenson had one. They had one on a box. I don't know that I've ever seen this. If a guy that went around the back of another guy and got a putback dunk on a missed free throw. You don't see those two things happen often, a putback dunk on a missed free throw, and a guy not cutting in front but going around somebody behind their back to get position. Maybe a lot of that's on Vandy, but it's ugly for the Commodores, and for Carolina, at least you saw some life. James Reese V had a good game for them last night. I don't know what else to say on this one.
No, I mean, South Carolina dominated the glass. That was obvious watching that game. Yeah, like you said, it was just that was the advantage they had. They took advantage of it, and yeah, that was really the biggest takeaway. I will say this: you don't see a team win a game by 9 very well. A close game, right? Like it was pretty close, and they were down 11 in the second half, I guess it was. I don't see a team win that kind of game, going 9 of 21 from the free throw line, like South Carolina, shooting 43%. That was ugly. But, I mean, this game it played out as you would expect. One team gets a big lead, the other team rallies, just two inconsistent teams, and, frustration at many times for both. And I think that what do we take away for South Carolina? Well, they got 3 SEC wins, 2 against Vanderbilt, 1 against Georgia. I don't know. The other games they lost by double digits to Tennessee and Arkansas and 8 to Florida. And they also lost to Auburn by 15. So I just don't. I mean, these are 2 bottom 4 teams in the SEC. That's just kind of what this game is. And like you said, I don't know that there's a lot to take away for either one of them. Who they're not very inconsistent, and you don't really know what to expect night in night out for either one of them. And that's just, I think, going to be the theme for both the rest of the season. So,
Jermaine Cousinard was plus 24 last night. He played more than he has in a while. And when he goes, he and Keyshawn Bryant were their best 2 players coming into the year. Bryant didn't do much last night, but that's one positive you can take away for Vandy. And look, that's a program where the bar of standards is on the ground right now. And that fan base has been very forgiving of Jerry Stackhouse, who has done an awful job in recruiting. Has done some good things at times on the floor. He's got his team engaged on the defensive end. But that looked like a wheels have fallen off game last night. The fans are starting to turn on him. They get a Georgia team that they beat 2 weeks ago in Athens. It's coming to Nashville that'll be energized after winning a game. This is one – I need to see how they react against Georgia, but this is one where it could go south very quickly, and people are getting really impatient with him. And they've had some tough breaks. They've got a couple of key guys out, but he didn't recruit well, and that left him with no margin for error. He's paying the price. And I think a lot of their fans have had it with them. Nobody's showing up for games anymore. This is one it's going to be really interesting to see how the next 6 to 8 weeks play out.
Well, like we said before, it's a win now mentality in the SEC just because of the expectations for where the league is at now, and when you see your program fall to the level that it's fallen, yeah, it's frustrating because like we said, it's it feels like a century ago now, but it's like Vanderbilt was a top 5 team in the SEC many years, and it's just like your expectation is that you're going to have a chance to get to the tournament perhaps every year, and obviously it's not going to happen. But now it's like your expectation is like, can we just get out of the bottom? Can we get out of the Wednesday night play-in game?
Yeah, they're not going to do that now, I don't think.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like that's where that's a big dip in your reality, I think, of where you were before and where you are now. And as we said when he took over, it didn't matter who took over. It was going to be a grind to be able to push this program back to where it needed to be, to get the fans back into it. And how do you do that, right? It's winning games.
Yeah.
And if you don't win games, that just that makes that challenge very hard. And so we'll see. They're another one. If you look at schedules, which I love looking at schedules, they have not got an easy rest of the way here. I'd probably look at that and say they may have one of the tougher schedules too of anyone left. They've still got Kentucky, LSU, Auburn, A&M, Alabama, Mississippi State, Florida. I mean, even the Missouri game, right, doesn't look so easy anymore. They don't have an easy road the rest of the way. So like they're gonna have to find a way to win some of these, because if not, you are probably looking at a not so great finish to the season. So,
parting thoughts?
Nope. We will have our SEC Big 12 Challenge previews coming up, and be sure to subscribe. We'll have, as I mentioned before, individual games. We'll break down some of the top games, and then we'll have some of the others kind of all mixed together in one video. So be sure to check that out. Have a lot of videos coming your way here over the next couple days. So
lots of videos, and probably baseball videos starting next week. We'll go 2 for 1. It's a fun time of year when baseball and basketball start to collide. Anyway, please hit the subscribe button if you're watching and you haven't. That helps us out. He's Blake Lovell. I'm Chris Lee. Plenty more content coming here at the 14.